aware are you? October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and last month the tragic disappearance and murder of Gabby Petito brought heightened awareness of this atrocity to our society. But how aware are you? Perhaps you think domestic violence doesn't affect you or anyone around you. Think again. I'm Lisa Pickett, and I'm going to do some myth busting about domestic violence, DV, intimate partner violence, IPV, and domestic abuse. Before we start, there's a couple of truths I want you to know that are not myths. And the first one is that far more women are victims of domestic violence than men. So I'll be referring to victims as she and abusers as he, even though that's not 100% of the time. Also, domestic abuse is on the increase, so it's something that everyone needs to be aware of. The statistics I'll be sharing come from the Department of Justice as reported through the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So let's get started with myth number one. Myth number one is, I don't know anyone involved in domestic violence, so this doesn't affect me. Perhaps you believe the stereotype that abusers are middle-aged men who are of low income or perhaps unemployed, who just hang out in the bars, get drunk, get in fights all the time, and go home and beat their wives. But this is far from the truth. The truth is, abusers come from all income levels, all education levels, all ethnicities, and all ages. Abusers can be professional businessmen who are Dr. Jekyll in public and Mr. Hyde in the home. They can even be college students. 1 out of 3 women report sexual or physical abuse. Those statistics are much higher even for college-age women, 18 to 25, at 43%. Shannon Thomas, a trauma therapist and licensed clinical social worker supervisor, says, "We are witnessing a societal shift with a massive increase of severely toxic adolescents and young adults. We see the influence of peers and toxic online culture, and with it comes a deeply concerning influx of narcissistic and sociopathic individuals." Dr. Deborah Winger, a domestic violence and child abuse expert, says 90 to 95% of all domestic abuse does not leave scars or bruises. The truth is, most abuse is hidden, it's not reported or even talked about. And so the truth is, you know someone, probably many someones, who are victims of domestic abuse or possibly even abusers themselves, even if you don't know who they are. Myth number 2 is that DV or IPV is just physical or sexual assault. The truth is, abuse is a mindset of power and entitlement. It results in patterns of behavior of coercive control. Sarah McDougall, an abuse recovery coach, categorizes domestic violence in all its different forms into 13 different categories of tangible and intangible abuse. They are the tangible, physical, sexual, verbal, financial, threats and harm involving children, property, or pets. Intangible types are emotional, psychological, intellectual, social, cultural, or spiritual. We don't have time to get into what all of those look like, but just a few things, and perhaps some that you haven't thought of before as being abuse, are road rage, choking, throwing things, damaging or confiscating property, ignoring or denying access to basic needs or her own thoughts and feelings, coercing or bribing for sex, pornography, prostitutes, lack of intimacy outside of sex, intimidating, threatening, manipulating, deceiving, blame shifting, gaslighting, shaming, humiliating, controlling her spending, or his own impulsive buying and running up debt. All the ways don't always happen to every person, but all the different types are intertwined. All physical abuse also includes some types of emotional and psychological abuse, and psychological and emotional abuse can cause physical and health problems. Survivors say that the emotional or psychological abuse is just as bad, if not worse, than the physical abuse. So the truth here is, whether abuse is seen or unseen, it goes way beyond physical beating, stabbing, shooting, or raping. It's an attitude of entitlement that is displayed through patterns of both tangible and intangible coercive control. Myth number 3 is that abuse is a relational problem, that it takes two to tango. The truth is, abuse is an abuser's problem. Nothing that the victim did or didn't do made him do it. Abuse is an attitude. It's a choice. The attitude of entitlement and justification. Julie Owens, a trauma therapist and domestic violence expert, says that DV is not a behavior problem. It's a belief problem. It's a choice. Abusers believe they're superior and that they have the right and maybe even responsibility to keep their partner in line. They don't lose control. Quite the opposite. They choose control. It's all about the abuser's desire to control his partner. He believes he's entitled to dominate her and tell her how to live. He justifies his behavior by telling himself it's his right to punish her in any way he sees fit. This explains why he doesn't treat everyone in his life the same way. So because abuse is not a relational problem, relationship counseling is ineffective. Help for abusers and for victims is very different. Again, Owen says that no anger management, couples counseling, behavior therapy, or even batterer intervention is going to change an abuser. He has to become sick of his behavior and admit that he chooses to abuse. He needs to take responsibility, stop blaming, minimizing, and denying, and deeply want to change, and do the hard work every day for the rest of his life to let go of the power and control. Sadly, abusers rarely admit their problem, get help, and do the work required to change. Also, sadly, many victims never tell, as we saw earlier. Through psychological abuse, they are conditioned to minimize or question the abuse. But when they do seek out help, because of domestic violence awareness, there's much help to be found, and there's great opportunity for them to get support in getting out of the abuse and to healing from the trauma from it. We've only touched on a very small tip of this very large iceberg that domestic violence is in our society. But I hope that now you are aware that domestic violence is not just physical battering and rape, but that there are many types of tangible and intangible coercive control that are perpetrated by abusers from all walks of life. You're equipped now with 3 truths. Number 1, you know someone, and probably many someones, who are victims of domestic abuse, or perhaps even abusers themselves. Number 2, domestic abuse is not just physical, leaving cuts, bruises, broken bones, but much of it is hidden, and that is just as damaging to the soul. Number 3, that domestic abuse is caused by an attitude of entitlement and the choice of the abuser. The victim is never to blame. Knowing the truth of just these 3 things makes you more aware of domestic violence, and this can help keep you safe as well as help you help others.